Picture a 4-year-old sitting alone at a table. There's a marshmallow in front of them. One marshmallow, right now, or 2 marshmallows, later, if they can just wait. The adult leaves the room. A hidden camera starts rolling. Some kids grab it in seconds. Others sit there, squirming, covering their eyes, talking to themselves, somehow making it the full 15 minutes to claim the second marshmallow. For 50 years, this single moment has been treated as a window into your entire future. Wait, and you're disciplined, successful, headed for a good life. Grab it, and you're impulsive, headed for trouble. That's the story everyone tells about the marshmallow test. But the real story is stranger than that, and it has almost nothing to do with willpower. This experiment began in the late 1960s, when psychologist Walter Mischel started testing preschoolers at Stanford's Bing Nursery School. The setup was simple. A child sits with a treat. They can ring a bell to call the researcher back and eat it immediately, or wait for the researcher's voluntary return and get to instead. Mischel filmed hundreds of these sessions, and what he captured became one of the most famous moments in psychology. It wasn't a quick experiment, either. Mischel and his collaborators ran variations of it for years, testing what happened when the treat was visible versus hidden, when children were told to think about the marshmallow's taste versus its shape, when they were given little mental tricks to distract themselves. Across all of it, one pattern kept showing up. Children who could find some way to mentally distance themselves from the reward waited far longer than children who fixated on it. Years later, he went back and checked on those same kids. The results seemed almost impossible. Children who'd waited longer back in preschool were scoring higher on their SATs as teenagers by a striking margin. Some analyzers found the correlation was strong enough that researchers described it as one of the most powerful predictive links ever found in behavioral science. They had better social skills, lower rates of substance abuse. Mischel called the ability to delay gratification a protective buffer against nearly every kind of trouble that could show up later in life. The marshmallow test became a legend. Parents started running their own versions at home. Teachers tried it in classrooms. The message seemed crystal clear. Teach a kid to wait, and you've handed them the keys to a better life. But here's where it gets complicated. In 2018, researchers Tyler Watts and Greg Duncan decided to run the experiment again with a much bigger and more diverse group of children than Mischel's original Stanford sample. And when they crunched the numbers, the effect was barely half of what the original study had found. The mind-blowing prediction that made the marshmallow test famous was, it turned out, partly an illusion of a small, unusually privileged sample. Mostly children of Stanford faculty, the kind of kids who, as Mischel himself once joked, were the type to probably go on to start Microsoft or something. So if willpower alone doesn't explain who waits and who doesn't, what does? This is where the story turns into something far more interesting than a test of character. Go back and watch the footage closely, and you'll notice something. The kids who waited the longest weren't gritting their teeth and staring down the marshmallow with iron resolve. They were doing the opposite. They covered their eyes. They turned their chair around. They sang to themselves, or pretended to take a nap, or stared at a mirror on the wall, anything to avoid looking at the thing they wanted. Mischel and his colleagues found that successful waiting wasn't about suppressing desire through sheer force. It was about strategically not looking at the temptation at all. The kids who lasted longest had, almost by accident, discovered a trick. Out of sight, out of mind. That's strange enough on its own. But there's a deeper twist buried underneath it. In 2013, a researcher named Celeste Kidd ran a version of this experiment with one crucial change. Before the marshmallow even showed up, she split a group of children into 2 situations. In one, an adult made a small promise, gave them a plain cup of crayons, and said, "Wait a bit, and you'll get a much better set." Then that adult actually came back with the better set, exactly as promised. In the other situation, the adult made the same promise and then returned empty-handed, apologizing, asking the child to just make do with what they already had. Only then did Kidd run the marshmallow test on both groups. The children who just experienced a reliable adult waited, on average, 12 minutes. The children who just experienced an adult break a promise waited about 3-4 times the difference, based on nothing but a single prior interaction that had nothing to do with marshmallows at all. Suddenly the entire test looks different. A child staring at a marshmallow isn't just running a willpower experiment in their head. They're running a probability calculation. Will this promised reward actually show up? Has this kind of promise been kept before? If your experience of the world says that adults often don't follow through, the smart move isn't to wait. It's to take the guaranteed treat in your hand right now. Because betting on a future that's let you down before is the irrational choice, not the disciplined one. The Rochester researchers were careful here, and their caution matters. The sample was small, just 28 children, so this single study wasn't enough to overturn decades of marshmallow research on its own. But other teams have since tested similar versions of the idea, manipulating how reliable an environment feels before handing a child the marshmallow, and the same basic pattern keeps reappearing. Trust, or the lack of it, moves the needle on waiting time by a wide margin, often a wider margin than measures of pure self-control do on their own. Look at it that way. And the marshmallow test stops being a measure of a child's character. It starts looking like a measure of how reliable their world has been. That reframes everything Michel originally found. The children who waited longest at Stanford's nursery school weren't necessarily born with more grit. Many of them came from stable, well-resourced households where promises from adults were usually kept. Waiting had, statistically, paid off for them before. The marshmallow test wasn't purely measuring self-control. It was, in part, quietly measuring trust, and trust is something a child's environment teaches them, one kept or broken promise at a time. This doesn't mean the original finding was meaningless. There's still a real, if smaller, link between early self-regulation and later outcomes. But the popular version of the story, the one that says some kids are simply born with the discipline to succeed and others aren't, leaves out the part that matters most. It leaves out the years of evidence a child has already collected by the time they sit down at that table. Every kept promise, every broken one, has been quietly training them on what waiting is actually worth. So the next time you find yourself unable to wait for something, for a reply, a paycheck, a result you owed, consider what your own history might be telling you. Maybe it's not a lack of discipline at all. Maybe some part of you has simply learned, through enough experience, exactly how much a promise is worth. Think about the relationships and institutions in your own life that have taught you this lesson without you ever noticing the lesson was happening. A job that's followed through on every raise it promised teaches you patience is worth it. A landlord who never fixes what they say they will teaches you the opposite. And it's a lesson that quietly generalizes far beyond that one landlord. You don't consciously decide to become someone who can't wait. Your brain just keeps a running tally of how the world has treated your patience so far, and it adjusts accordingly. The same way a 4-year-old adjusts after one broken promise about a set of crayons, and maybe the 4-year-old who couldn't resist the marshmallow wasn't failing a test of character. Maybe they were just better at reading the room than anyone gave them credit for.